Hola YouTube. Thank you for being here for another video. I really appreciate that for joining me. So, my experience growing up as a Latina immigrant from El Salvador with immigrant parents bringing their cultural traditions with them into a foreign country made it a different experience for me to navigate my childhood here in the US. I am the eldest of what used to be five children. My parents fled El Salvador in the late 80s due to the Civil War because they didn't want their firstborn to actually grow up in a war ridden country where there was no prosperous future for me because poverty was so rampant among most of the population. A family friend who was also in the same group that migrated with us to the US shared with me how it was having a toddler cross over the border with them. And she said everyone was afraid I was going to cry. I mean, that's normal. Of course, I'm a child, right? When we were hiding from the migra. So they would try to cradle me as much as possible. And she told me on the occasions where there was so much fear that they were near, to her and everybody else's dismay, I didn't cry. She said I was so well behaved, like something in me knew I needed to be as quiet as possible. When she told me this, I was amazed because I thought maybe she's exaggerating. I was a toddler and I'm sure I was very fussy. I asked my mom about it, and she said that it was true. I was a quiet toddler, and that despite everyone being afraid that at some point I, I being a child, blew up our cover, she said I never did. I think it was like there was something in me that just knew I needed to be quiet and calm as possible. But once we arrived to the US safely, it was a completely different story. My grandma told me that she remembers my first month here in the US. I cried so much. They were afraid I was very sick or that I'd broken something along the way or caught something. So my parents and her took me to so many doctors to see if there was something wrong with me. But they would always tell them that I was fine, there was nothing wrong, that I was healthy. But no matter what, I continued to cry bloody murder. And then a month later, my grandma said, out of nowhere, I just decided to stop crying. A part of me wonders if crying for that month that I cried nonstop, well, almost nonstop, if it was me, all the emotions that I absorbed, all the fear that I absorbed from everyone, my parents, the surrounding, the whole experience, if that was just me expressing it and letting it out because now somehow, some way, my little body knew there was no more fear of repercussions or putting people in danger. I know that Dr. Gabor Mate talked about babies absorbing the emotions of their mothers in stressful situations due to the connection the baby and the child has to the primary caregivers, which to me makes a lot of sense because, as he mentioned, babies are dependent on their caregivers to be protected and for survival. So it only makes sense that as a toddler on this journey with my parents, I might have absorbed all of their fear and just took it in. So, the reason I'm sharing this story is because part of being our authentic selves is being able to feel our emotions and not feel ashamed of them when we feel them. Now, this also entails being able to express them, if we can, in a healthy way. So, ever since I can remember, I was very emotionally expressive. I felt emotions very deeply, and I still do. Now, I was taught that expressing emotional discomfort was wrong. My parents didn't grow up with exemplary parents who attuned to their emotional needs. So, being confronted by a child who was very genuine in their expression of emotion was something foreign to them. Instead of having empathy for us, myself and my siblings, they leaned towards more of irritation and anger. And growing up, I didn't understand why, and I never questioned it because it was normal for my parents to always react that way. Not always, but consistently. Once they couldn't handle us not being able to regulate, they resorted to reprimanding us through physical means. That emptiness that I felt every single time, not knowing how to soothe myself and wanting one of my parents to come and comfort me, never happened. Now, going back to my parents, it was such a challenge to validate my siblings and my emotions. If we cried because of sadness, fear, disappointment, and it lasted too long, their anger just bursted out. If we were too excited, too energetic for too long, they would become so irritated and just yell at us and tell us to stop horsing around and tell us to be quiet. It was as if something within them heard nails on a chalkboard. They had such low tolerance. And I'm sharing all of this because, as a Latin child with immigrant parents who were overwhelmed by the idea of being in another country, trying to make ends meet and provide basic necessities for us as children and as their family and give us a better life, was a lot on their plate. Now, on top of all of this, they also came from intergenerational trauma in which they accept as commonplace. That's just the way that things were back then. As a child, what I learned through my parents' reactions of our emotions was that being emotional, like overtly emotional, was bad, weak, childish, annoying. Their reaction of anger as my parents became more justified. So my siblings and I were taught by our first agents of socialization, us expressing our emotions was not a safe thing to do. Sociology teaches us that our immediate family, as well as extended, starting with our parents or caregivers, are the foundation to our experience in setting social expectations of how to be and interact within the larger world. They teach us the basic properties of being human in this social world, such as how to act, how to relate to other people, how the world works around us. Thus, they become our primary agents of socialization, socializing us into what it means to be human. They teach us cultural and societal norms, moral values, proper human behavior, and what social roles entail, such as gender roles or family roles are. They set the tone for how we form our social identity as well as our psyche. They are the first role models to what it means to be a human being. Other major factors also intersect that influence the parental norms within a culture, such as race, social class, gender roles, and sexuality, and even religion. For example, in low income families, parents expect obedience to authority, which was actually a common experience for me as a Latin child growing up with immigrant parents. My parents came from poverty, making cents to the dollar on a day's work. In the 80s, El Salvador's population experienced poverty levels between 60 to 70%, thus normalizing these harsh economical and social conditions as we don't cry, we survive and keep moving forward, then becomes internalized as a cultural norm to overcome the pervasive socio and political realities that they lived in. I remember as a child being so confused seeing kids outside of the Latin culture being able to cry without their parents being upset about it. Of course, there is so much to be discussed as to why, but what I truly wondered was why my parents lacked so much empathy. My parents grew up in a poverty ridden country where violence was so rampant and the future for them seemed so bleak with no prospects of getting out of it. They were forced to grow up fast, take on responsibilities as children to help their families survive. They were not granted the freedom to be and act as children did. Their inner child or their inner children, my mom and my dad, are still very hurt. And because of that, they could not relate to us as children. That despite them being young adults raising children, the unaddressed childhood trauma that lived within themselves lashed out as anger. It was the go to emotional reaction. They have no empathy for their own inner hurt children. Because of all of this, my parents were robbed of their own childhood and limited in their own cycle emotional expressions as children. And then it becomes a cycle because they were not given the opportunity to express themselves fully as children should, to have that playful innocence be the core of your being as a child. It limited them in being able to be playful adults. Everything that I just talked about, I circle all of that back to the idea and the topic of being able to express ourselves and our emotions in healthy ways as a part of being our authentic selves. If we did not need emotions to survive as human beings, then our human species would have never evolved into them. Emotions are what bonds us to each other. Emotions are signals to our physical body that something needs to be addressed, expressed, or released. Dr. Joe Dispenza says emotions are energy in motion. Honoring these emotional signals will connect us more to ourselves and our needs, will attune us to our body and our hearts. So much inner healing can be done with us sitting with our own emotions without shaming ourselves for feeling them. And a part of the journey to getting back to our authentic selves is to give ourselves permission to feel emotions as being vibrant human beings. And on that same token, we owe it to ourselves, our parents, our family, our ancestors who were taught to limit their expressions. We owe it to them to now be able to give ourselves that liberation or liberate ourselves in being able to experience them fully and understand and know it is such a vital part of our human experience. And I hope that I gave you a little bit of food for thought, especially for my Latin sisters and brothers who grew up in similar environments. Thank you so much. Until next time.